I secretly bought a cabin. While traveling, a friend sent videos. My toxic family invaded it. I sent them to my husband. An hour later, he walked in and their fun stopped cold. The airport terminal was a chaotic mess of delayed flights, crying children, and the overwhelming smell of stale coffee. But for the first time in my 36 years of life, I actually felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I was sitting on a cold metal bench, waiting for my connecting flight to finally take me home after a grueling 2-week freelance project on the opposite coast. I was exhausted. My back ached, my eyes were burning from staring at a laptop screen for 14 hours a day, but I was smiling. A real, genuine smile. Because in my carry-on bag, tucked safely inside a leather folder, was a set of thick brass keys and a property deed with my name, Valerie, typed boldly across the top line. No cosigners. No family names attached. Just me. For 5 years, I had been living a double life. During the day, I took on regular client work to pay the bills. But at night, from 10 in the evening until 3 in the morning, I took on every extra side hustle I could physically handle. I hoarded every single extra dollar. I skipped vacations, I drove a 10-year-old car that rattled when it hit 60 miles per hour, and I wore the same winter coat for 4 seasons straight. And I did it all for one specific reason: to buy a small, secluded wooden cabin on the edge of a quiet lake, 3 hours away from the city. It was my sanctuary. A place where my phone wouldn't have a signal unless I walked to the end of the dock. The most important part of this entire 5-year plan was absolute secrecy. My husband, Harrison, was the only person in the world who knew. Harrison is 38, a man built like a quiet mountain, calm, incredibly patient, and fiercely protective. He had helped me paint the porch and fix the plumbing, completely supporting my need to keep the cabin off the grid. You see, keeping it a secret wasn't a quirky preference, it was a matter of psychological survival. If my parents, Winston and Sylvia, found out about the cabin, it wouldn't be mine anymore. It would instantly become the family vacation home. They would demand a spare key within 5 minutes of hearing the news. And then, there was my older sister, Kendall. Kendall was 39, the undisputed golden child of the family, a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. If Kendall knew about the lake house, she and her entitled fiancé, Declan, would have moved in every summer weekend, leaving empty wine bottles on the counter and expecting me to clean the sheets when they left. I was the designated ATM and the permanent scapegoat. That had been my role since I was a teenager. Whenever Winston made a bad investment, he would guilt-trip me into helping out the family. Whenever Kendall maxed out her credit cards trying to maintain an illusion of wealth, Sylvia would call me, crying, telling me that I needed to be a good sister and bail her out because Kendall had a sensitive soul and couldn't handle stress. I had spent my 20s setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. But not this time. The cabin was my boundary. It was the one beautiful thing in my life that they had no claim over. It was completely untainted by their manipulation, their backhanded compliments, and their constant demands. As I sat in the terminal, listening to the intercom announce another delay for my flight, I pictured the heavy wooden door of my cabin. I imagined the smell of pine and the quiet stillness of the lake. I just needed to survive 3 more hours in this airport, and then Harrison would pick me up, and we would drive up there for our very first weekend as official, debt-free owners. I leaned my head against the cold glass window of the terminal, closing my eyes, wrapping that thought around me like a warm blanket. But that peace was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. My phone vibrated aggressively against my leg. I pulled it out, rubbing my tired eyes, expecting a text from Harrison giving me an update on his own business trip. Instead, I saw a notification from Piper. Piper was a local real estate agent who had helped me find the cabin. Over the past few months of navigating inspections and closing details, we had actually become pretty good friends. She lived just across the bay, directly opposite my property. The text preview didn't say much. It just said, "Valerie, you need to call me right now. Are you at the lake?" My stomach instantly tied itself into a heavy, cold knot. Why would she ask if I was at the lake? I had told her clearly that I was stuck on the other side of the country. I quickly typed back, "No, I'm at the airport. Flight delayed." "Why? Is something wrong with the house?" A little bubble with 3 dots appeared as Piper typed her response. It felt like an eternity. Finally, her message popped up. "There are 4 cars parked in your driveway. All the lights are on. Music is blasting so loud I can hear it across the water. I thought you and Harrison were throwing a massive party without telling me." My breathing stopped. The noise of the airport terminal faded into a dull, distant hum. 4 cars. Lights on. I stared at the screen, my brain desperately trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe some teenagers had broken in? Maybe it was a massive misunderstanding? But deep down, in the dark, bruised part of my heart, I already knew exactly what was happening. A sickening realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. My mind violently flashed back to exactly 1 month ago. I was living in my city apartment, knee-deep in packing boxes, getting ready to move some of my winter clothes up to the cabin. My mother, Sylvia, had shown up completely unannounced. She claimed she was just in the neighborhood and wanted to bring me some soup, playing the role of the caring mother. I had been foolish enough to let her in while I took a quick phone call from a client in the other room. I was gone for maybe 10 minutes. When I came back into the living room, Sylvia was standing near my antique writing desk. The top drawer, the one where I kept my important documents, my tax files, and my spare keys, was slightly ajar. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I just assumed the wood had warped. But now, sitting in the harsh fluorescent light of the airport terminal, the puzzle pieces slammed together with horrifying clarity. Sylvia hadn't just dropped by to bring soup. She had been snooping. She had systematically gone through my private things. She must have found the thick folder from the title company. She must have seen the new property address, the closing documents, and worst of all, the spare brass key I had foolishly left sitting right on top of the paperwork. She had stolen it. My own mother had stolen the key to my house right from under my nose. The level of betrayal was suffocating. This wasn't just a simple boundary violation. This was a calculated, deliberate theft. She had smiled in my face, asked about my day, all while pocketing the key to the one place I had built just to escape her. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the terminal. They had found my sanctuary. Before I even had the chance to spend a single night in my own bed, they had invaded it. My hands began to shake uncontrollably as I stared at the text conversation with Piper, terrified of what she was going to send next. Before I could even formulate a reply, my phone vibrated again. Piper had sent a video file. I didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to turn off the phone, get on a different plane, and just disappear to another continent. But the masochistic part of me needed to see it. I needed to see exactly what they were doing to my home. I fumbled in my bag for my wireless earbuds, jammed them into my ears, and hit play. The footage was shaky at first. Piper had clearly walked around the edge of the lake and was hiding behind the large pine trees near my back porch. The video zoomed in on the large bay windows of the living room. The curtains were wide open. There they were. My blood ran completely cold. My sister, Kendall, was standing on top of my custom-made oak coffee table, the one Harrison had spent 3 weekends sanding and staining by hand. She was wearing muddy boots, laughing hysterically, and spinning around while holding a bottle of my $200 vintage champagne. She was shaking it, threatening to spray it all over the new leather sofa. Standing right next to the sofa was her fiancé, Declan, holding a beer and cheering her on like a frat boy. The camera panned slightly. My cousin Tucker was sitting in my favorite reading chair, wiping his greasy hands on the armrest. And then there was my mother. Sylvia was standing by the stone fireplace, holding a glass of wine, holding court as if she were the queen of a castle she had built herself. Even through the thick glass of the cabin window, Piper's phone managed to pick up the audio. Sylvia's voice cut through the thumping bass of the stereo. Well, she practically shouted over the music. I have to admit, it's about time Valerie did something useful for this family. It's a decent little place. Too bad her taste in furniture is still so unbelievably cheap. We'll definitely need to replace these terrible rugs before we come up here for the 4th of July weekend. Kendall stopped spinning and laughed, a shrill, grating sound. Right? Leave it to my pathetic little sister to buy a vacation house and not even have the decency to furnish it properly. But whatever, free lake house for us. I stopped the video. I couldn't breathe. My chest physically hurt. The sheer audacity, the staggering entitlement, it broke something inside me. They weren't just trespassing. They were celebrating their theft. They were mocking me in the very space I had bled to buy. For the first 30 years of my life, my reaction to their cruelty would have been tears. I would have cried, blamed myself for not being a better daughter, and eventually forgiven them. But sitting in that airport, I realized I wasn't crying. My eyes were completely dry. The sadness was gone, replaced by a dark, absolute, and terrifying rage. It was a cold fury that made my thoughts hyper-focused and crystal clear. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text Kendall to yell at her. Calling them would just give Sylvia a chance to gaslight me, to tell me I was overreacting, that family shares everything, that I was being selfish. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I opened my messages and found my chat with Harrison. He had texted me an hour ago saying he had finished his meetings and was relaxing at his hotel, which was about 2 hours north of the cabin. I didn't type a long explanation. I didn't type a paragraph about how hurt I was. I just forwarded the video Piper had sent me. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. My phone rang. It was Harrison. I answered, my voice terrifyingly flat. Did you watch it? Are you at the airport? His voice wasn't loud. It was low. So low and so dangerously calm that it sent a shiver down my spine. Yes. My flight is delayed. I can't get there. I heard the sound of keys jingling and a hotel door slamming shut in the background. I'm already in the truck, Harrison said, his words clipped and precise. I am 2 hours away. Do not call them. Do not text them. I am going to handle this. Harrison. I whispered, the first crack of emotion showing in my voice. Valerie, listen to me, he said, the protective steel in his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. They crossed the line. I'm going to make sure they never, ever forget tonight. He hung up. And for the first time that evening, a tiny spark of justice flared in my chest. The overhead intercom crackled to life, a robotic voice echoing through the terminal. Attention passengers on flight number 412. We regret to inform you that your departure has been delayed by an additional 4 hours due to severe weather patterns in the Midwest. I let my head fall back against the wall, staring up at the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. For more hours. For hours stuck in this sterile, brightly lit purgatory while my family threw a frat party in my sanctuary. The wait was excruciating. It felt like my skin was crawling. Every minute that ticked by on the large digital clock above the departure gate felt like an hour. My thumbs hovered over the screen of my phone. The ingrained, deeply conditioned urge to fix things, to be the peacemaker, was fighting a brutal war with my newfound rage. A part of my brain, the part that had been thoroughly brainwashed by 36 years of Sylvia's emotional manipulation, was screaming at me to just send a polite text. Hey Mom, I see you guys are at the cabin. Please don't break anything. We can talk about it later. It would be so easy to fall back into submission. It would be so easy to avoid the explosion that was undoubtedly coming. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember why I couldn't back down this time. I dug deep into the ugly archives of my memory, pulling up a specific Tuesday afternoon from exactly 8 years ago. I was 28 years old. I had finally saved up enough money to put a down payment on a reliable car, something that wouldn't break down on my commute. The very day I was going to the dealership, Winston called me. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. Kendall was getting married, and she simply had to have a custom-made designer wedding dress that was thousands of dollars over their budget. You're single, Valerie, my father had said, his voice dripping with that condescending authority he loved to use. You don't have a family to support. Your sister needs this day to be perfect. Transfer the money to my account by noon. When I tried to say no, when I tried to explain that I needed a car for work, Sylvia took the phone. She cried. She told me I was a bitter, jealous sister who couldn't stand to see Kendall happy. She told me I was breaking the family apart. After 3 hours of relentless emotional battery, I broke. I went to the bank, transferred my entire down payment, and spent the next 2 years taking the bus in the freezing snow. Kendall wore the dress once, spilled red wine on it at the reception, and laughed about it. They never paid me back. They never even said thank you. I opened my eyes. The terminal was still loud, but the conflict in my head was dead quiet. No, I wasn't going to text them. I wasn't going to give them the opportunity to twist the narrative and make me the villain. They had stolen my key. They had invaded my home. Harrison was driving. He was the one thing in my life they couldn't manipulate, couldn't bully, and couldn't buy. I looked at the clock. It had been 45 minutes since he called. He was halfway there. The anticipation was sickening, a mixture of pure terror and a dark, vindictive thrill. I plugged my phone into the charging station under the seats, making sure I had full battery. I was not going to miss a single second of what was about to happen. An hour and 15 minutes after Harrison hung up, my phone screen lit up with an incoming FaceTime call. It was Piper. I answered it immediately, pressing my earbuds deeper into my ears to block out the airport noise. Piper's face appeared on the screen, illuminated only by the pale moonlight. She was breathing heavily, whispering into the microphone. "Valerie, I'm back. I'm crouching behind the rhododendron bushes near your patio. Harrison texted me that he's about 20 minutes out. He asked me to stay on the line with you so you can see everything." "Show me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Piper. Show me what they're doing." Piper flipped the camera around. The lens focused through the large glass doors. The scene inside had escalated from a disrespectful gathering to a full-blown desecration. My heart pounded against my ribs as I watched Tucker, my 34-year-old cousin who still lived in his parents' basement, rummaging through my kitchen cabinets. He pulled out a bottle of rare, aged scotch, a gift Harrison had bought for my birthday to celebrate closing on the house. Tucker didn't even look at the label. He just popped the cork, grabbed a cheap plastic cup from a grocery bag they had brought, and poured it halfway to the top. He took a massive gulp, made a face of disgust, and spat a little of it back into the cup before wandering back to the living room. The camera panned to the dining area. Winston, my father, was sitting at the head of my rustic oak dining table. He had his laptop open, heavily tapping on the keys. "This is ridiculous," his voice boomed, loud enough for Piper's microphone to catch it clearly through the glass. "Sylvia, did you look for the router? There is zero internet connection up here. How am I supposed to check my emails? Valerie is such a fool for buying a place in a dead zone." "Oh, stop complaining, Winston," Sylvia replied, walking past him with a plate of greasy food. "It's free real estate. We'll just force her to pay for a satellite connection before we come up for Thanksgiving." I watched, paralyzed, as Declan took another sip of his beer and deliberately placed the wet, sweating bottle directly onto the porous wood of the coffee table, leaving a guaranteed water ring. Kendall was currently lounging on my white linen sofa, eating a slice of pizza, carelessly letting crumbs fall into the fabric. Every action, every word, was a deliberate slap in the face. They felt so comfortable. They felt so entitled to my space, to my things, to the peace I had literally traded my sleep and my youth to build. It was an emotional home invasion. They were dirtying my sanctuary not just with their muddy boots and greasy food, but with their toxic presence. "I'm so sorry, Valerie," Piper whispered from behind the camera. "I want to go in there and scream at them myself. This is disgusting." "Don't move, Piper," I said, my hands gripping the edges of the metal airport seat so tightly my knuckles were turning stark white. "Just keep the camera steady. Let them enjoy their last few minutes." The sheer audacity of my mother planning a Thanksgiving trip to a house she had literally broken into was staggering. They really believed I would just roll over. They believed that when I found out, I would just accept it, pay for the internet, and prepare the guest room for them. The absolute delusion of these people. "Wait," Piper whispered sharply, the camera shaking slightly. "Hold on. I see lights." Through the FaceTime video, I saw a subtle shift in the lighting outside the cabin. A pair of bright, sweeping headlights cut through the darkness of the trees at the top of the gravel driveway. The beam of light briefly illuminated the pine branches before settling directly onto the front of the house. "He's here," Piper whispered, her voice tight with anticipation. The camera shifted as she repositioned herself deeper into the bushes, making sure she had a clear view of both the driveway and the large living room windows. My breath hitched. I could see the dark silhouette of Harrison's heavy-duty truck pulling up right behind Kendall's expensive, leased SUV, effectively blocking all four of their cars from leaving. The engine cut off. The headlights died. For a brief second, the only light came from the warm, golden glow spilling out of my cabin windows, highlighting the grotesque party happening inside. My phone vibrated against my cheek. I pulled it away to look at the screen. It was an incoming audio call from Harrison on my secondary number. I accepted it immediately, keeping Piper's FaceTime video running on the screen so I could watch and listen at the same time. "I'm parked," Harrison's voice came through my earbuds. It wasn't loud. It was devoid of any yelling or erratic emotion. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly steady. It was the voice of a man who had completely bypassed anger and moved straight into execution mode. "I see you," I whispered back, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear of him, but from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Piper is streaming it. I'm watching the living room. Are you okay?" he asked, a brief flash of tenderness breaking through the ice. "I want them out, Harrison," I said, a single, hot tear finally escaping my eye and tracing a line down my cheek. "I want them out of my house." "They won't just be out," Harrison replied softly. "I am going to tear down their entire delusion. I want you to watch closely, Valerie. This is the last time they will ever disrespect you." Through Piper's video, I watched the heavy driver's side door of the truck swing open. Harrison stepped out onto the gravel. He is a tall man, broad-shouldered and imposing even on a normal day. But tonight, as he walked toward the front porch, there was a heavy, predatory stillness to his movements. He didn't rush. He walked with deliberate, heavy steps. Each crunch of gravel under his boots felt like a countdown. Inside the cabin, the music was still pounding. Kendall was laughing about something Declan had said. Winston was still angrily typing on his laptop. None of them had noticed the truck pull up. None of them had heard the gravel. They were completely insulated in their own bubble of arrogance. "I'm at the door," Harrison's voice murmured in my ear. I watched him step onto the wooden planks of the front porch. He didn't reach for the doorbell. He didn't politely knock. He didn't even try the handle to see if it was unlocked. He took one step back, squared his shoulders, and raised his boot. "Watch this," Harrison whispered into the phone. The tension was unbearable. I held my breath, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. I was miles away in a sterile airport, but I felt like I was standing right next to him on that porch, ready to finally blow the entire toxic foundation of my family straight to the ground. If you're enjoying the story so far, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Also, drop a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the confrontation. The sound was like a gunshot echoing through the quiet woods. Through the small speaker of my earbuds, I heard the violent, splintering crack of heavy wood giving way. Harrison didn't just push the door open, he kicked it straight off its latch. The heavy brass lock I had probably installed just 3 weeks prior tore through the doorframe, sending shards of pine scattering across the entryway floor. The door slammed against the interior wall with a deafening bang that shook the entire cabin. Through Piper's camera, I watched the chaos unfold in glorious, slow motion. The obnoxious pop music pumping from the Bluetooth speaker didn't stop immediately, but all human movement inside the house froze entirely. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on a movie. Kendall was mid-laugh, her mouth hanging wide open in a grotesque, silent scream. Declan jumped back so violently he knocked his beer bottle over, sending pale yellow liquid cascading over my custom oak coffee table. My mother, Sylvia, dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, red wine pooling into the grout of the stone fireplace. Then, Harrison stepped fully into the light of the living room. He didn't say a word. He just reached over to the kitchen island, found the speaker, and violently yanked the power cord straight out of the wall. The sudden, suffocating silence that fell over the room was heavier than any screaming match I had ever witnessed. From my seat in the airport terminal thousands of miles away, I felt a massive, powerful wave of adrenaline surge through my chest. Harrison stood there, towering over them, his broad shoulders blocking the only exit. His face was a mask of absolute, frozen fury. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles feathering beneath his skin. He slowly scanned the room, his dark eyes locking onto each of them one by one, letting the sheer weight of his presence suffocate them. No one dared to breathe. Tucker, my useless cousin, slowly lowered his plastic cup of stolen scotch, his face draining of all color. Harrison slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, turned the volume all the way up, and held it out toward the room. A second later, the audio from the video Piper had sent me began to play. It was loud, painfully loud. My mother's shrill, recorded voice bounced off the cabin walls. At least Valerie is finally useful for something. Too bad her taste in furniture is still so unbelievably cheap. Followed by Kendall's recorded laughter. Free lake house for us. Harrison let the video play in its entirety. When it ended, he lowered the phone and looked directly at Winston. My father, a man who had spent his entire life bullying people with his booming voice and fake authority, suddenly looked very small, very old, and incredibly terrified. "Did you forget who owns this house?" Harrison asked. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Or did you just assume my wife was going to let you act like parasites for the rest of her life?" Sylvia was the first to try and recover her footing. She plastered on a fake, trembling smile, taking a tentative step forward. "Harrison, dear, there is no need to be so dramatic. We were just in the area and wanted to surprise Valerie. We are family. Family shares." Harrison didn't blink. "You broke in, Sylvia. You stole a key from a locked drawer in her private apartment, drove 3 hours, and trespassed on property she bought with her own blood and sweat. That isn't family. That is a felony." Winston puffed out his chest, desperately trying to reclaim his patriarchal dominance. He took a step toward Harrison, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "Now you listen here, son. You do not speak to my wife that way. This family built Valerie. We raised her. If she has the money to buy a luxury cabin, she owes it to us to share it. We have every right to be here." Through the phone screen, I watched Harrison's eyes narrow. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You built her," Harrison repeated, stepping forward so quickly that Winston physically stumbled backward. "You built nothing, Winston. You tore her down. You used her as a safety net for your own financial failures." Harrison pointed a long, accusing finger directly at Kendall. She flinched, shrinking back against the sofa. "And you," Harrison growled. "You stand there drinking a $200 bottle of champagne that you didn't pay for, making fun of the sister who drained her own savings account to pay for your wedding dress 8 years ago. A dress you ruined. A sister who worked 14-hour days while you complained about having to work part-time. You are a 39-year-old child throwing a tantrum in a house you could never afford." Declan, trying to play the tough guy, stepped in front of Kendall. "Hey man, back off. You're taking this way too far over a stupid house." Harrison slowly turned his gaze to Declan, looking him up and down with an expression of pure disgust. "Declan, the man who has been between jobs for the last 3 years. The man currently putting his muddy boots on furniture my wife bought. Tell me, Declan, did you chip in for the property taxes? Did you help pay the mortgage this month? No. You are a freeloader. You are all freeloaders." Harrison turned back to the center of the room, addressing my parents. I was crying silently in the airport terminal now, but they were tears of profound relief. Every single word Harrison was saying was a truth I had swallowed, buried, and choked on for my entire adult life. He was speaking for the terrified 22-year-old girl who had been forced to empty her bank account. He was speaking for the 28-year-old woman who had been called a failure for not buying a brand new car. Valerie owes you absolutely nothing, Harrison's voice boomed, finally rising in volume, vibrating against the glass windows. She kept this house a secret because she knew the second you found out, you would infect it. You would try to take it over like you take over everything else. You claim you love her, but all you do is look at her and see an ATM. You see a punching bag. Sylvia began to cry, but it wasn't a real cry. It was the same manipulative, theatrical sobbing she had used on me 100 times before. How can you be so cruel? She wailed, covering her face. We are her parents. We are just trying to be a family. Then you failed, Harrison stated coldly. He didn't offer her a tissue. He didn't soften his posture. He was a brick wall, completely immune to her toxic performance. Because right now, the only family Valerie has is me. And I protect my family. Harrison looked at his watch, the metal of the band glinting in the warm cabin light. You have exactly 3 minutes to gather your trash, pack your bags, and get off this property. If I see a single one of your vehicles in this driveway at the 4-minute mark, I am calling the county sheriff, and I am pressing charges for breaking and entering, theft, and property damage. You can't do that. Kendall shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of panic and entitlement. We drove 3 hours. It's pitch black outside. Where are we supposed to go? I don't care, Harrison replied, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. Sleep in your cars. Find a motel. But you will not spend another second under this roof. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The sheer, immovable authority in his voice finally broke through their delusion. The reality of the situation crashed down on them. They weren't dealing with Valerie, the peacekeeper. They were dealing with a man who would gladly watch them be handcuffed and dragged away in the back of a squad car. Panic erupted. The arrogant, triumphant energy from just 10 minutes ago evaporated into thin air. Tucker was the first to move, scrambling toward the hallway to grab his duffel bag, nearly tripping over his own feet. Winston's face was still flushed with anger, but he didn't argue anymore. He aggressively slammed his laptop shut, shoved it into his briefcase, and grabbed Sylvia by the arm, pulling her toward the coat rack. Through Piper's camera, the scene was incredibly pathetic. These were the people who had terrorized my self-esteem for decades. These were the people who had made me feel small, inadequate, and utterly useless. And now, they were scurrying around like frightened mice, frantically grabbing their cheap plastic grocery bags and half-empty bottles of alcohol. Declan was trying to quickly wipe the spilled beer off the coffee table with his sleeve, looking nervously at Harrison, who stood by the door like a silent executioner. Leave it, Harrison snapped. Declan flinched, dropped his arm, and scurried out the door without another word. Kendall was the last to leave. She stormed past Harrison, her expensive designer bag slung over her shoulder, her face a portrait of humiliated rage. She stopped right in the doorway, glaring up at him. Valerie is going to regret this, she spat, venom dripping from her words. When she crawls back to us crying, I won't forgive her. You tell her that. Harrison leaned down, bringing his face inches from hers. She is never crawling back to you, Kendall. Enjoy your drive. Kendall let out a frustrated scream and stomped down the porch stairs, her heels clicking aggressively against the wood. I watched the headlights of their 4 cars flicker on in the darkness. One by one, engines roared to life. The tires spun on the loose gravel as they frantically backed up, desperate to get away before Harrison made good on his threat to call the police. The taillights slowly disappeared down the winding dirt road, fading into the thick forest until there was nothing left but absolute darkness and the quiet sound of the wind blowing across the lake. Inside the cabin, Harrison closed the broken front door as best as he could. He stood in the middle of the empty living room, surrounded by the mess they had left behind. He looked exhausted, but his shoulders were relaxed. He slowly turned his head, looking directly out the large bay window, right into the bushes where he knew Piper was hiding with her phone. He looked right into the camera lens, his eyes soft and filled with an overwhelming amount of love. "They're gone, Valerie," Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying through the audio feed. "It's over. You're safe." Sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair at the airport gate, miles and miles away from the chaos, the dam finally broke. The cold, robotic numbness I had been clinging to for the past 2 hours shattered into a million pieces. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. I cried until my chest heaved and my throat burned. I didn't care who was watching me. I didn't care about the confused looks from the other delayed passengers. For the first time in 36 years, someone had stood up for me. Someone had formed an impenetrable shield around me and refused to let my abusers cross the line. "Thank you," I whispered to the screen, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. "Thank you so much." The sun had just started to rise over the dense pine trees when my taxi finally crunched its way up the long gravel driveway. My flight had eventually boarded at 2 a.m, depositing me at the regional airport just as the sky was turning a bruised, pale purple. I hadn't slept a single minute. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and my body was running purely on the fumes of leftover adrenaline and a massive cup of terrible airport coffee. As the taxi rounded the final bend, the cabin came into view. It looked breathtaking, straight out of a painting. Thick, white morning fog clung to the edges of the dark wooden siding, rolling off the roof and drifting down toward the glassy surface of the lake. The air outside was crisp, smelling intensely of pine needles and damp earth. For months, I had imagined this exact moment. I had daydreamed about walking up these wooden steps for the first time as the proud, secret owner of my own destiny. But now, as I paid the driver and grabbed my small suitcase, my chest felt incredibly tight. A dark, insidious shadow of anxiety crept into my mind. The old Valerie, the terrified, people-pleasing version of myself, was whispering in my ear. What if you went too far? What if Winston really does have a heart attack from the stress? What if you ruined the family forever? The psychological conditioning of an abusive family doesn't just disappear overnight because of one dramatic confrontation. It lingers like a virus, constantly trying to trick you into returning to your designated role. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps, staring at the front door. The brass lock I had been so proud of was completely mangled, hanging off the wood by a single, bent screw. A physical testament to the violence of the night before. The door opened with a soft creak. Harrison stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants, holding 2 steaming mugs of black coffee. His hair was messy, and he looked just as exhausted as I felt, but his eyes lit up the second he saw me standing there in the gravel. He set the mugs down on the porch railing and came down the steps in 2 long strides. Before I could even drop my suitcase, he wrapped his arms tightly around my shoulders, pulling me against his chest. I buried my face in his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of his soap and the lingering smell of wood smoke. "You made it," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. His grip was tight, grounding me, pulling me back from the edge of my anxious thoughts. "I'm here," I choked out, my voice raspy. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that alone. I should have been here." Harrison pulled back slightly, framing my tired face with his large hands. "No. You being miles away was exactly how it needed to happen. If you were here, Sylvia would have found a way to manipulate you. She would have cried, she would have played the victim, and you would have let them stay to keep the peace. You know that's true." I swallowed hard, looking down at the dirt, knowing he was absolutely right. I was so scared on the ride over, I admitted, a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill. Scared that I would wake up this morning and feel guilty. Scared that I'm actually the terrible daughter they say I am. Harrison gently lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "You are not terrible, Valerie. You are surviving. Setting a boundary against people who want to drain you dry does not make you a bad person. It makes you a strong one. They're gone and they're never coming back." Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my bag and followed Harrison up the steps and into the cabin. The smell hit me first. Underneath the natural scent of the cedar logs, there was a stale, sour odor of spilled beer, cheap perfume, and greasy food. The physical damage to the house wasn't structurally devastating, but the psychological desecration was overwhelming. It felt as though a dark, toxic cloud had settled over everything I owned. There were muddy boot prints tracked across the brand-new pine floors. Empty bags of potato chips were tossed carelessly onto the kitchen counter. My beautiful, hand-woven white rug, the one I had saved up for 3 months to buy, had a massive, dark red wine stain bleeding right into the center of it. I dropped my suitcase by the door and walked slowly toward the rug. I knelt down, tracing the edge of the dried red stain with my finger. It wasn't just spilled wine. It was a physical manifestation of their disrespect. It was a reminder that no matter how hard I tried to build something beautiful, they would always find a way to leave their filthy mark on it. "We can throw it out," Harrison said gently, coming up behind me and placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'll buy you a new one today. We can replace the coffee table, too." I stared at the stain for a long time. The sadness slowly evaporated, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. "No," I said, my voice steadying. "No, we aren't throwing it out. We are going to clean it." I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a bucket, hot water, and the strongest carpet cleaner I had under the sink. I brought it back to the living room, got down on my hands and knees, and started scrubbing. Harrison didn't argue. He grabbed a rag and a bottle of wood polish and started working on the water rings Declan had left on the coffee table. We worked in absolute silence for 2 hours. It was grueling, physical work. My arms ached and my knuckles were raw from the stiff bristles of the brush. But as I scrubbed, something incredible began to happen. The repetitive motion became intensely therapeutic. With every harsh stroke of the brush against the fabric, I wasn't just removing the wine. I was scrubbing away the 36 years of guilt. I scrubbed away the memory of paying for Kendall's dress. I scrubbed away the echo of Winston telling me I was a disappointment. I scrubbed away the suffocating weight of Sylvia's fake tears. I was physically reclaiming my space. I was literally wiping their toxic influence out of my house and out of my mind. By noon, the cabin smelled like lemon polish and fresh pine again. The floors were gleaming. The red stain on the rug was completely gone, leaving only the pure, bright white fabric behind. I stood up, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and looked around the room. It was mine again. It wasn't just a secret hiding place anymore. It was a fortress that had withstood a siege and come out victorious. I walked over to Harrison, who was drying his hands on a towel in the kitchen, and wrapped my arms around his waist. "Thank you," I said again, this time with a clear, unwavering voice. "For defending me. For helping me clean it. For everything." "Always," he smiled, kissing my forehead. "Now, let's turn off our phones and enjoy our house." For 3 glorious, uninterrupted days, Harrison and I lived in a bubble of absolute peace. We drank coffee on the dock, watching the morning mist burn off the lake. We took long walks through the woods. We didn't talk about my family. We barely even talked about the real world. But the real world, specifically the toxic vortex of my family, was desperately trying to reach me. I hadn't turned my phone off completely because I still needed to be available for a few freelance clients, but I had muted all notifications from my parents and Kendall. On the morning of the 4th day, while Harrison was outside chopping firewood, I sat on the sofa and finally opened my message app. The sheer volume of communication was staggering. There were 42 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and dozens of text messages. I scrolled through the texts, reading them like I was studying a psychology textbook on narcissistic manipulation. They followed a highly predictable, textbook pattern. The first wave, sent on the night they were kicked out, was pure, unadulterated rage. Kendall had sent a string of messages calling me every vile name in the book. "You are a psycho. Your husband is a violent maniac. I hope you rot in that stupid cabin alone." The second wave, sent the following morning, was the classic attempt at gaslighting. Sylvia had texted a long paragraph attempting to rewrite history. "Valerie, I don't understand why Harrison overreacted so terribly. We were just planning a nice surprise to celebrate your new home. You know your sister gets a little overly excited. We meant no harm. Call me so we can sort out this ridiculous misunderstanding." When the gaslighting didn't work and I didn't reply, they moved to the final, most desperate tactic, weaponizing guilt and health. Winston had texted me the night before. "Valerie, your mother has been crying for 2 days. My blood pressure is through the roof and I've been having chest pains. My doctor said I need to avoid stress, but my own daughter is causing me to have heart palpitations. If I end up in the hospital, it is entirely your fault. Answer the phone." A month ago, a message like that would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I would have called immediately, begging for forgiveness, apologizing for causing him stress, completely ignoring the fact that they broke into my house. I would have taken all the blame just to make the chest pain stop. But sitting there, looking at the glowing screen, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt. No panic. Just a cold, clinical realization of how pathetic they truly were. They had lost control over their favorite punching bag, and they were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. I didn't block them. Blocking them would send a message that I was running away, that I was hiding. Instead, I did something much more powerful. I left every single message on read. I wanted them to see the little blue check marks. I wanted them to know that I had seen their rage, I had seen their fake tears, I had seen their medical threats, and I simply did not care. The silence was my armor. It was the sharpest weapon I possessed. By not replying, I was starving them of the drama and the submission they craved. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards, and I was choosing to simply walk away from the table. I locked my phone screen, tossed it onto the freshly cleaned coffee table, and walked outside to join my husband. My peace, however, was interrupted a few hours later. We were sitting on the porch swing, eating sandwiches, when the harsh, unmistakable sound of tires tearing up the gravel road echoed through the trees. My heart did a slight, involuntary jump, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. A large, silver SUV rounded the corner and aggressively parked right at the base of the porch steps. It was Winston's car. The doors opened, and all four of them, Winston, Sylvia, Kendall, and Declan, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and deeply unhappy. They hadn't come for a vacation this time. They had come for a siege. Harrison immediately stood up, his jaw clenching, his body instinctively moving to stand between them and me. He took a step toward the edge of the porch, ready to rain down fire on them again. But I reached out and grabbed his arm. I pulled him back gently. "No," I said quietly, looking up into his eyes. "You fought them for me 3 nights ago. Today, I finish it." Harrison looked at me, a mixture of concern and immense pride washing over his face. He nodded slowly and stepped back, leaning against the wooden railing, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He was my backup, but this was my fight. I stood up, smoothed down my jeans, and walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at the 4 people who shared my DNA. Winston stepped forward, putting on his best, disappointed father face. "Valerie," he started, his tone heavy and patronizing. "We have driven another 3 hours. Your mother hasn't slept. We are willing to look past Harrison's violently disrespectful behavior the other night. We are here to accept your apology, and we can all move past this like a family." The sheer audacity of his words was almost comical. They break into my house, get thrown out, and now they want my apology? I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked down at him with a level of cold detachment that actually made him visibly flinch. "There is no apology coming, Winston," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady across the yard. I intentionally used his first name, stripping him of his parental title. Sylvia gasped, clutching her chest. "Valerie, how can you speak to your father that way? After everything we have done for you. Everything you have done for me?" I repeated, my voice hardening into steel. "You mean draining my savings account to pay for Kendall's mistakes? You mean telling me I was worthless unless I was handing you cash? You mean stealing a key from my apartment and violating the only safe space I have ever owned? Is that the everything you are talking about?" Kendall crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "Oh, stop playing the victim, Val. It's just a house. You're acting like a crazy person over some wood and a lake. You need us. You have no friends. When Harrison gets tired of your boring personality and leaves you, you'll have no one else. I looked at Kendall, the golden child, the woman I had spent my whole life being compared to, and suddenly, all I saw was a deeply insecure, miserable person. "I don't need you, Kendall," I said softly, the truth of the words resonating deep in my bones. "I never needed you. You needed me to be weak so you could feel strong. But that ends right now." I looked at the four of them, memorizing the shock and confusion on their faces as they realized their control was completely gone. "You are not my family," I stated, the finality of the sentence hanging heavy in the air. "You are just people I used to know. People who used me. This cabin is mine. This life is mine. And you don't get a seat at my table anymore. Do not ever come back here. If you step foot on this gravel again, Harrison won't be the one calling the sheriff. I will." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for Winston to argue or Sylvia to cry. I turned my back on them, grabbed Harrison's hand, and walked inside. I pulled the heavy wooden door shut behind us, the broken lock completely irrelevant. We stood in the hallway, listening. For a long, tense minute, there was only silence outside. Then I heard the sound of car doors slamming shut. An engine started. The tires slowly crunched against the gravel, the sound fading away until it was completely gone. They were gone. And for the first time in my entire life, standing in the middle of my own living room, holding my husband's hand, I finally felt untouchable. Am I wrong for refusing to forgive my family and cutting them completely out of my life, even though my parents claim my dad's health is failing because of the stress? Or should I have accepted their half-hearted apology just to keep the peace? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button for more stories like this. See you in the next video.